Tonight, we step into the broad-soled shoes of a weary schoolteacher from Connecticut along the muddy Hudson Valley roads of autumn 1790 toward Sleepy Hollow, where lantern light, rain, and rumor mingle at day's end. If you enjoy this video, please consider subscribing. Now take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let's begin our journey into the valley where stories linger longer than the daylight. The road ahead grows softer and darker as the rain deepens, and you guide the little horse into the ruts with a patience born of many such miles. Water laces down from beech and oak leaves, running in threads that gleam when the last scraps of daylight find them, then vanish as the woods lean close once more. The cart creaks in a steady rhythm, boards answering the tug of the harness, and the iron rims kiss stones hidden under the mud with a dull, careful clink. Your shoulders ache beneath your coat, the wet wool growing heavy, and the scent of damp leather, ink, and paper blends with the earthy sweetness that rises from the forest floor. Books shift softly behind you when the wheel drops and climbs, a muffled shuffle of pages that reminds you of the order they promise beyond this weather and hour. You keep your hands easy on the reins, a measured touch on the lines, and feel the horse listen, ears twitching toward your voice whenever you murmur. The day thins to a grey that is almost sound, and in that softening you match your breath to the animal's breath, and make the road a simple matter of one careful step after another. Thoughts of the school waiting somewhere up the valley arrive like the smoke of a hearth you cannot yet see, warm and reassuring in their own slow way. You picture a low room with whitewashed walls, a window to let in a slice of winter sun, a stove that ticks as it cools after arithmetic lessons and penmanship drills. The copybooks you carry, the hornbook you packed out of habit, the few slates and quills, and that small bottle of imported ink, all of them feel like anchors to a future you can hold. You try the syllables of family names you might learn, Dutch and English together, and hear in them the steady music of a community that has decided to welcome a teacher. There will be geese in the dooryards, perhaps, apple barrels by the sheds, and a row of children whose shoes leave wet prints along the threshold after snow. You imagine the first morning, the benches pulled close, small hands learning to shape letters, and your voice setting a pace as steady as these hoofbeats. When the cart tilts around a bend and your shoulder rubs the wheel box, you hold to that picture, smoothing it the way a thumb smooths a page. All along this valley in the late 18th century, the land is a patchwork of old Dutch farms and the newer hopes of English arrivals, and the seams between them show in everything from eaves to accents. Stone farmhouses squat low against the weather, their roofs sloping in familiar Dutch lines, while clapboard houses, newer and brighter, stand a little taller along the lanes. Barns keep to their business, red and brown beside fields where the last of the corn stubble catches rain, and orchards hold their rows in quiet patience, their branches hung with a few stubborn apples. The river to the west moves with its own slow certainty, a path for sloops whose masts cut a clean, bone-white line against fair weather, though you have seen only mist and cloud today. Not so many years have passed since troops walked these roads, continental and loyalist patrols leaving stories as footprints, and at a tavern's hearth you can still hear men say the names of places where pickets once stood. In such a place, memory gathers easily, and tales from the old world find ready soil here, sprouting into new shapes that bear the savour of both continents. Churchyards, bridges, and bends in lanes all take on meanings that mingle faith with fear, reason with wonder, until a hollow where fog lingers at dawn is marked on the tongue as if it were written on a map. Sleepy Hollow. People say it as a kind of shorthand, and whether they smile or cross themselves depends less on what they have seen than on what the season and the hour and the company at hand encourage them to remember. Those stories walk the edges of your thoughts the way crows step along a fence rail, near enough to notice, but not near enough to require a change of course. The little horse blows through its nose when a birch branch sheds a handful of water, and your hand goes forward, voice low, the lines easing so the bit does not bite at a start. A puddle holds a piece of the sky that is already night black, and a gust of wind turns the surface into ripples that make a shape where there is none. You angle the wheels toward the gravel verge, choosing soundness over speed. Your neck is stiff, your stomach a hollow you have promised bread and broth before too long, and the pages behind you call for a dry place as urgently as you do. You mark the way the mud tugs at the hooves, and reckon the weight of the cart against the strength of the animal, and tell yourself not to ask too much of either. If a tale rises in you, it is the old practical one of travellers. Find shelter before full dark, find hay for the horse, find a hearth where boots can dry. The rest can wait until morning, when roads shrink and ghosts of any kind, memory, smoke, superstition, are easier to see in their daily clothes. By degrees the woods loosen their hold, breaking into small clearings where stone walls glisten and the grass looks nearly black with wet. The sound of water comes up from the hollow ahead, not the broad crush of the river, but the quick, round voice of a stream shouldering past its banks, and your ears lift toward it as the horse's ears do. You feel out the road with the wheels, testing each low place before committing the weight, and keep your eye where the faintest paleness lies, the line where it must pass over water. A smell of wood smoke threads through the rain, thin but certain, and with it the metallic sweetness of wet iron that often lives near a bridge. You speak the horse's name as if to remind it of the simple partnership that has carried you all this way, and when it shies at a drifting heap of leaves, you give the rein rather than pull, letting the fear go out of it like breath. Your coat sends a trickle down your wrist when you push the brim of your hat back to see better, and somewhere a church or a small bell set on a door. A single tone passes through the rain like a needle through cloth. At the far edge of the bend, a warm smear of light appears and vanishes, appears again and grows steadier, and you guide the cart toward it, as though you have known this road forever. The bridge comes into view as a pale band across the quick brown water, its low railings dark with rain, and the planks shining like wet bark. You reined your small horse to a patient walk, feeling the cart tug behind with the homely weight of books and ink and the neat bundle of your spare coat. The air turns metallic with the scent of soaked leaves and the iron tang of the stream, and your breath lifts in a faint mist that seems to fold into the drizzle and vanish. Every hollow sound carries farther in this damp evening. The creak of leather, the small clink of a buckle, the drop and patter on the cart's canvas. You listen for anything untoward, and hear only the world going about its autumn business, water running, rain stitching itself to earth. Beyond the span, a handful of lamps wavers in the wash of weather, the low, inviting glow of a riverside inn promising warmth without promises at all, just light in the dark. The promise is enough to draw you forward, not because of spectres in the road, but because hunger and weariness have their own quiet authority. As you near the water, the valley's layered past seems to step beside you, not as noise, but as context, as the lay of the land itself. In this year of 1790, the Hudson's banks are a patchwork of old Dutch homesteads with their steep-roofed barns, English newcomers with square houses and hedged gardens, and fields still marked by the passage of soldiers not so many autumns ago. The revolution is present the way an old injury is present, stiff in certain weather, talked around at tables, acknowledged with nods and changes of subject. Stories here have long roots. The Dutch brought tales across the ocean and planted them alongside rye and apples, and the English brought others, and in the market town mingling they took on new colours. Folklore is not a museum but a conversation, and the names of creeks and hills carry both prayer and play, reminders of faith and fear, reason and wonder sharing a bench by the door. You think of this as your cart eases onto the boards, your horse's hooves clattering level and sure, each note of wood and iron, reminding you that this night is made of ordinary elements. The stream rushes beneath, brown and lively, and your breath holds on its own, and then releases, and the breath you release is the one you needed. The far bank rises no more than a shoulder-height lip of earth, glossed with grass and slick leaves, and the road there bends toward the lamps in a courteous curve. A painted sign swings from its iron bracket and shuffles rain along its edge, revealing by turns a prancing horse and a name you do not quite read in the wet. The inn looks stout and practical, with low eaves and a stone chimney that gives its warmth to the scene in a steady plume. You taste apple and smoke on the air, and remember suddenly the feel of a tin cup warming your palms, the comfort of a bench that does not move. Your little horse gives a cautious snort at a wagon shadow and then settles, trusting your hand and the familiar, homely words you murmur without thinking. You are no more credulous than you need to be, no more brave than the hour asks. The tricks of light along wet boughs are just tricks, yet they nudge at your memory of tales told on long New England nights. It is not that you expect riders without heads to come careering down the lane, only that, with your belly empty and your coat damp through, the mind is a lantern that imagines shapes in its own smoke. The lights ahead multiply on puddles, and your sense of time folds shorter, as if distance itself prefers company. Arriving at the door, you find the inn-yard a small world of purpose, its mud tracked into shallow patterns by recent wheels and boots, its fence hung with bundles of hay that smell sweet even in the rain. A stable boy in a wool cap steps from the shadow with a respectful nod, and you pass him the reins with quiet gratitude. The horse flicking an ear toward the stall, as if already deciding to be comfortable. The door gives to your hand with a soft wooden sigh, and warmth breathes out to meet you, edged with the friendly bite of cider set to mull by the hearth. Inside, the room feels low and sheltering, the rafters dark from long seasons of smoke, the walls hung with a few pewter plates and a sprig of drying herbs the fire casting a steady gold across faces lined by labour and weather. Farmers and tradesmen cluster in easy knots, boots outstretched to the blaze, chairs rocked back a little, talk drifting around harvest and horses, the price of oats, a neighbour's fence, a cousin newly arrived from Albany. Your coat finds a peg, and your shoulders, unburdened at last, sag a little in a way that is less defeat than consent. The long road slows inside your muscles and becomes a story you might tell some day when someone else arrives late and wet and weary. A woman in an apron brings a cup that steams and asks where you came from and where you are going, not out of nosiness, but out of the useful, ordinary care of one neighbour for another. Conversation settles around you like a quilt, patched with dialects and names that ride easy on the tongue, Van and Ten and D and Old English surnames that carry counties with them wherever they are spoken. When the landlord, a broad fellow with a waistcoat shiny at the points, learns you are to teach in the Dutch-settled village up the road, he lifts his brows and, with a practised twinkle, wonders aloud if you plan to instruct even the Hollow's headless horseman. The remark falls into expectant quiet, and then rises in good-humoured laughter, the kind that rolls out from the chest and makes its own weather. You find yourself smiling not at the notion itself, but at the way it dissolves the remaining stiffness of the road, as if some small knot of worry has been untied with a single tug. No one at the tables leans in to frighten you. Instead, a grey-bearded man recounts, between sips, how his father told stories of St. Nicholas rides in the old country, and a younger mason counters with a yarn from a militia camp about a lantern mistaken for a will-o'-the-wisp. A weaver speaks of a cousin who swears that a fox, seen at dawn, foretells fine weather for flax, and the room hums with the easy give and take of belief and jest. In this light, superstition looks like neighbourliness dressed for evening, something to share without harm, like bread broken with salt. Supper comes in steady measures, a trencher of stew rich with onions and beef, a heel of brown bread that gives under your fingers with the softness of fresh crumb, and a wedge of cheese that tastes faintly of the meadow. You eat at the end of a table where two men are comparing harness buckles, and their talk, while precise, soothes you, every small fact a stone in the path back to yourself. The landlord circles with a generous hand, and now and then the bell of the old Dutch church carries in faintly through the rain, a soft, measured note unhurried by anything but time. You think of other rooms in other valleys, in New England and beyond, where a traveller sits down and is made part of a moment that will never be written on any map. The cider warms you from the middle out, and your damp cuffs begin to steam slightly in the hearth's reach, and you become aware that your earlier imaginings have thinned like fog in rising daylight. When at last a candle is pressed into your hand and the stairs creak under your weight, the world has softened its edges to a glow that belongs to wood and tallow and rain. The night on the far side of the panes is only weather moving through trees, and inside your mind the line between reason and wonder rests like a thread coiled neatly on a shelf. In the small chamber under the eaves, the bed is clean and low, the quilt pieced in faded reds and blues that make their own quiet pattern of care. You set your ink and books in a stack on a chair, not to be used tonight, but to keep you company with their familiar promise of tasks that can be set in order come morning. The candle's flame leans a little when you pass and rights itself, and the window collects beads of rain that slide down like slow thoughts finding their way. Across the river, you imagine lanterns moving in other yards, and across the years you almost hear your own voice explaining to a future pupil how this valley holds the meeting place of old and new, a place where tales do not demand belief to be true in their own way. You are not chased nor haunted. You are simply tired, simply fed, simply made welcome, and in that simplicity lies the kind of peace that outlives a storm. When you lie down, the mattress's straw settles with a kindly hush, and the day loosens from you as smoothly as a knot well tied and well undone, leaving you with the faint, wistful sense that the bridge you crossed tonight was not only of wood, but of story, carrying you from weather to rest. You pause beneath the dripping eaves and let the valley gather itself around you, layered and steady as the hills. Rain threads from the inn's shingles and beads upon your coat, while beyond the yard the river moves with its immense quiet, a slate band that has guided barges, sloops, and small ferries since before you were born. Fields lie somewhere in the dimness, parcelled by stone walls and rail fences, their autumn furrows drinking in the damp, their orchards heavy with fruit that presses into cider and memory alike. Even in the muffled light you can sense the old Dutch order in the land, the low, stout farmhouses with their sweeping eaves, the barns set with practical geometry, and the newer English houses joined by stiles, lanes, and tidy kitchen gardens. Place names carry the valley's earlier tongue like a current under speech, the creek called a kill, the hook in a bend of shore, and the churchyards ringed with mossy tablets carved in a hand that once formed letters in Amsterdam or Haarlem. Yet mixed among these are the habits of newcomers, the English meeting-house square on its green, the clapboard schoolroom with panes imported at dear cost, the wagon ruts cut by traders riding up from New York toward Albany's markets. The storm makes a common hush of it all, and you feel how many kinds of past are pooled here, settling into the late hour like silt. In 1790, the everyday geography of the Hudson is a braid of work and worship, the necessary and the hoped for, and you stand at the crossing of those strands. Steeples and belfries mark the ridgelines, Dutch Reformed and Anglican and dissenting chapels kept by families who till by daylight and gather by candlelight, their psalms travelling across water as sound and habit and rule. Ferry slips cling to the river banks, where oarsmen have carried household goods, sacks of flour, casks of rum, and bundles of letters, while above them the high road carries drovers, tinkers, and schoolmasters with more books than shirts in their packs. Almanacs from Boston and Philadelphia arrive folded into saddlebags, their tables of tides and planting days thumbed by men who also know the weather by a maple's buds or the way crows fly low. Sermons circulate as small pamphlets, their pages soft from parson hands, and your own cargo feels kin to them. A speller with blue covers, a slim arithmetic, a reader with fables that promise order to the mind. Post riders and stage-coaches stop at inns like this one to change horses and exchange tidings, and the tavern benches remember news of births, prices of rye, rumours of treaties, and the turnings of Congress far to the south. The land seems patient with all this movement, as if it understands that a valley is a road as much as a home, and you, wet at the gate of shelter, are another spoke in that wheel. Alongside ledgers and catechisms, you live among travelling tales, and they carry themselves with the confidence of old clothes well mended. Stories of riders who do not stop for gates, or lights that bob along the church path, or a bell that tolls when no hand draws its rope, came here with sailors and soldiers, weavers and wives, and then leaned into American names and corners until they felt native to the soil. A German name for a hill, or a Dutch name for a stream, takes the place of a village green in some far county across the ocean, and suddenly a wandering soldier or a sleepless monk is said to move along the very road you travelled this evening. By hearths where cider simmers and the youngest child grows heavy against a shoulder, one voice will lead another into a tale, and someone will shake ashes from the pipe and swear he saw something strange by the bridge beyond the mill. You have heard such tellings in Connecticut parlours where the wind sang in the chinks, and you carry both their charm and their trouble with you now, as night gathers under the eaves. Your schooling pushes back with a measured hand, light refracts, tired eyes invent, horses startle at the sudden snap of a twig. But reason does not erase the comfort of a good story well told, and the care that people take to remember a place by attaching wonder to it. In this quiet moment, you sense that the valley's legends are not hazards so much as a way of speaking about the closeness of time itself, where yesterday and long ago sit together and the living greet them with a nod. A village like Sleepy Hollow sits where the past leans close to the present, neither conquering the other, and you feel the nearness of both as you watch rain ease to a fine veil. The war lies barely 10 years behind you, and though the muskets are stacked and the uniforms are put away, the fields here were once neutral ground, and stories of hungry foragers, vanishing cattle, and midnight alarms still pass at tables with the bread. People remember where a barn burned and where a patrol turned back at a flooded ford, and they remember, too, that a British officer was seized not far from these shores, his polished boots muddied by local men who knew every path and bramble. Memory hangs not as dread, but as a habit of naming. This is the lane where my uncle hid a sack of wheat. That is the meadow where my mother saw soldiers march past like a river of buttons. Because of that habit, a rumor of a headless rider can grow roots in the clay, not because the valley is credulous, but because it is practiced at keeping track of what happened where, and at making sense of fear by giving it a shape and a root. You touch the brim of your hat and listen to the ordinary life arriving through the door. The scrape of a chair, the clatter of a ladle, the rise of laughter that has nothing to do with hauntings, and your horse stamps in the yard, content to stand where feed and dry straw are not far away. Between the damp and the firelight, between weariness and welcome, you understand that the conversation here is as much between faith and reason as between neighbors, and that you have come to a place that will teach you as surely as you will ever teach it. You cross the threshold into heat, and a gentle apple warmth rises from a kettle hung near the hearth, slipping into your lungs like reassurance. The room glows with a low amber light, fire licking at split logs while a row of wet cloaks hisses on pegs near the door, your own among them. A boy with straw in his hair leads your mare away toward the stable yard, and the sound of her hooves on damp planks fades under the talk of men easing into evening. Boots thump, benches scrape, and somewhere tin spoons ring briefly against earthen bowls. The smells of wood smoke, stewed onions, and roasted meat weave themselves around you until the chill of the road thins to a memory. You feel the reins fall from your fingers to the landlord's hands, a napkin pressed there instead, and you realize how tightly your shoulders have been held since the first drops began to fall. A place is made for you at a long table without fuss, a mug set down steaming, and the rim warms your lip before you even taste the cider's soft, honeyed tang. Everywhere you look, the evening has gathered neighbors into easy proximity, and their talk arrives like the river itself, steady and alive. The stout man to your right has hands dark with iron dust, and speaks of horses as if listing kin, counting whose shoes will hold through frost, and whose will need resetting by full moon. Across from you, a ferryman with sleeves rolled above the elbow compares the Hudson's moods at dusk, nodding toward the window where rain beads and runs like quicksilver, and he ticks off times when the wind likely sleeps and when it wakes in a sulk. Names pass along the board like bread: Van Tassel, Archer, Jones, the older ones coloured by Dutch vowels, the newer ones clipped and English, and you hear the way they sit together without trouble under a single roof. A woman with a white cap refills bowls, the thin edge of her smile practised and kind, and she pauses to ask where you've come from, before moving on with a short, approving hum at the word school. Someone remarks on the corn cut before the rain, someone else on a ewe that lambed late, and the hum of ordinary business tampers down the echo of empty lanes you travelled to arrive here. The landlord, with cheeks warmed by his own hearth and an eye for strangers' nerves, waits until your second sip before he lets his jest loose on the room. "Any rider pace you through the hollow?" he asks, lifting one brow as if hoisting a lantern. Or did he lose his head for once and miss you? It is a line that has been shaped by much use. You can hear its smoothness, the edges worn down with laughter long before tonight, and the first to chuckle is the ferryman, who claims his cousin once chased a pumpkin shadow all the way to the toll house. You smile despite yourself, the question of whether you're being tested dissolving in the warmth of practiced mirth, and you answer only that your horse disliked the wind more than any spectre. A man near the hearth tells how a sheet hung to dry took on a life when gusts filled it, white and full and bobbing over the fence, and how his youngest will not walk that lane at dusk even now. Another confesses to mistaking his own cap, blown from his head, for a skulking thing, and the table leans into shared amusement the way wheat leans under a breeze, each stalk tipping because the ones near it already have. Bit by bit, the story of a headless rider becomes a coat you all try on together, light and well cut for company rather than dread. Supper arrives with a comfort that needs no proclamation, a deep bowl of beef and carrots, turnips sweetened by long simmering, and bread whose crust gives with a clean crack beneath your thumb. A plate of cheese travels down the table and pauses before you, sharp and nutty, while the woman in the white cap sets a dish of stewed apples close enough that their cinnamon draws you forward. Talk turns to the river's shallows, and the sloop that grounded last week on a bar newly shifted by spring freshet, and the ferryman says the tides have their own clock that ignores church bells and contracts. The blacksmith adds that wet roads mean delicate ironwork will wait till morning, and he has a colt to break that knows how to test a man's patience without ever turning mean. When you are asked what brings you north, you say books and a billet promised by a Dutch elder, and at the word books, heads nod for reasons that need no explaining. You hear the echo of a catechism and a ledger, and a child's halting first letters in that simple assent. A farmer mentions the old schoolhouse near the burying ground, its door warped by summers, its benches polished by restless hands. Another remembers horn books wrapped in thin horn, and a psalter in Dutch script brought by a grandfather from the old country, the letters still as black and upright as fence posts. You feel your purpose steady in that moment, not lofty so much as plain and practical, like a new axle greased and set, ready for miles. A boy darts in from the yard with the shake of rain and deposits your satchel by your feet, its leather already done steaming, and the landlord returns to tip a little more cider into mugs that have found their way to empty. He offers a pair of stockings to warm at the hearth, and points you toward a peg by the flames where your coat can forget the weather, and soon the prickle of damp cloth gives way to the fine relief of dry wool against skin. Conversation loosens into the comfortable drift that comes when obligations are folded up for the night. A story about a fox raiding a henhouse becomes a gentle argument about the cleverness of animals, then returns to laughter when the ferryman insists the fox will learn the ferry schedule if given half a chance. You add a small tale of your own, a Connecticut winter when snow piled to the lintels and a sled of books rescued from a leaky roof. And a cooper at the end of the table raises his mug to that, saying that saving words is as good a trade as saving grain. The landlord's earlier tease seems to have taken up lodging on the mantel, with the pewter tankards and the tall candlesticks, part of the room's stock of sayings, now rather than a demand on your nerves, and you find your shoulders easy, your ribs unhitched from the tight band travel sometimes draws across the chest. Around you the rain softens against the shutters, and the signboard outside complains gently on its iron bracket. But inside, the sounds fall into a kind of hush that favors clear voices and slow chewing. When at last the benches empty by twos and threes, and the fire's heart settles into coals, the landlord shows you up a narrow stair with a lantern that rings the hall in gold. Your room is small and square and sufficient, a bed with a rope lattice and a straw mattress that promises honest sleep, a jug and basin, a peg, a candle in a saucer with its own tiny universe of light. You set your ink and papers on the chest, as if placing them where they belong were a portion of work accomplished, and you let your spare shirt warm in your hands before drawing it over your shoulders. In the pause that follows, you hear the seamstress of the town mentioned faintly below, a plan for a new ploughshare, a child's laugh quick and high, and you feel the day's sharp notions melt into a softer outline. The legend that rode beside you in the lanes lowers its voice here, joined by other stories that ask less to be believed than to be shared. A string of small accounts that make a place and make a traveller a little less a stranger. You slide between sheets that smell faintly of lavender and ash, and the candlelight blurs the angles of the room, trimming worry into something that can wait. As your eyes rest, the river keeps its own slow conversation with the banks, and the world beyond the window becomes a kindly murmur, leaving you with the simple understanding that tonight, in this hollow between hills, company and warmth have answered the weather. The meal ends quietly, with warmth folding around you as the rain slips from steady drumming to a soft patter against the panes. A bowl of savoury stew, a heel of brown bread, and a slice of sharp cheese settle the long miles in your bones, while the cider's gentle heat rises to your cheeks with each unhurried sip. Around you, boots steam by the hearth, and damp coats hang from pegs, and the talk loops through fields and ferry schedules, a lame mare, and the price of oats after a wet week. Laughter moves easily among the tables when the landlord, polishing a tankard, tosses the old jest about the Hollow's headless rider as though it were a spice to liven the air, and you find yourself smiling with the rest as the tale is turned into an affectionate nudge rather than a threat. The teasing lands in that comfortable way stories often do in harvest time, when the year is round and off, and the mind prefers the familiar to the fearsome. You notice, in the cadence of voices, the mix of names and accents, broad Dutch vowels, clipped English consonants, and the plain Yankee speech you know from home, braided into a community that has learned to share both labor and laughter. The bell you heard at dusk becomes only a memory of metal on air, and the glow of the hearth seems to bend the edges of the room toward peace. When the landlord lifts a candle and offers to show you to your room, you rise with a touch of stiffness and gather the things that must be kept dry and safe. Your small canvas satchel holds your spelling books tied with twine, a worn copy of Dilworth's Guide, a dog-eared arithmetic, a bundle of straight quills, and the pewter sand shaker that keeps fresh ink from smearing, each item a modest promise of tomorrow's work. You have already seen a stable lad lead your horse to a lean-to, the cart tucked beneath, tilt-boards propped so that rain will slide away from your crates, and you thank the boy for the care as the landlord's light nods ahead like a small moon. The stair creaks underfoot as you climb, the tallow's scent sweet and a little smoky, while the passageway holds the faint breath of pine shavings and wool, and from outside comes the sigh of wind along the river bend. The latch of your door lifts with a wooden murmur, revealing a narrow bed, a trunk serving as a table, and a single chair, all clean and honest in their simplicity, and all you could ask of shelter. You set your satchel on the trunk, unlatching it to make sure that pages lie flat and the stoppered vial has not leaked. You lay out the quills to dry and fold your damp cloak over the chair's back, so that by morning it will be warm to the touch. The bed greets you with a homely chorus, the faint spring of rope, a whisper of straw settling, and the soft complaint of boards, while the mattress smells of clean hay and sun-dried ticking. Linen cools your skin and then yields, and the patched quilt, sewn with squares that once were aprons or shirts, holds the night at a measured distance. Through the small rippled pane of the window, a darker shape suggests the river, or perhaps only its long voice, a hush and a pause that never quite stops, like breath. Your thoughts, loosened by supper and the soft fatigue of travel, begin to drift toward the work waiting somewhere up the road. A low schoolhouse warmed by a stove at one end, a shelf of slates lined like shingles, a pail of water and a dipper, benches that creak when a pupil shifts. You imagine children whose names you will learn by heart. Perhaps a Van Brunt who loves to cipher, a Van Cortlandt who tucks a ribbon into her primer, a lanky boy with a jounce in his stride who hides a kernel of poetry in his pocket. You picture the careful frown of a left-handed writer learning to keep his sleeve from the ink as the letters become less wobbly by week's end. You see the first lessons unspool, the alphabet recited with shy pride, a copybook maxim taking shape. Make much of time, or industry is fortune's handmaid. Small sums counted in apples and nails, the whittled quill trimmed again and again until it finally sings across the page. The talk of the rider remains downstairs as a shared wink, yet it follows you in gentler form, the way wood smoke lingers in your hair after you leave a fire. The story feels less like a menace than like weather that people know how to live with, part mist, part memory, slipping through the valley as easily as the river slips around its bends. You think, not fearfully but with a quiet curiosity, about how such tales have voyaged across oceans and then adapted to new fields and lanes, how a headless horse, a will-o'-the-wisp, a black dog at a crossroads fit themselves to American roads and habits as surely as new crops and tools did. In this place, where a stone church keeps watch over the water and gravestones remember old Dutch names worn smooth by years of rain, stories do a kind of gentle keeping, marking time the way a bell marks the hour. They remind neighbors of kinships and losses, and they entertain a traveler caught out after dark, offering a shape for unease that can be held at arm's length, and, with company, turned into laughter. You feel that companionship now, the way a roomful of voices can soften a superstition into something friendly, and the knowledge eases the last tightness from your shoulders. Sleep takes its time, but it does not resist you, arriving as a tide rather than a storm, a series of small waves that lift and settle. You let your plans sink into that rhythm, the first morning's greeting at the door, the careful calling of the roll, the small ceremony of opening a book and laying it flat while the room falls quiet. Rain resumes and then hushes again, and the shutter taps once as if to say that the night is still at its work, and you should let it be. Somewhere below, a chair scrapes, and a last murmur of talk drops to embers, while in your room the candle dwindles to a bead and then a curl, the darkness becoming soft rather than deep. You turn the thought of the headless horseman one more time, and it becomes not a figure at your threshold, but an emblem of how people weave their fears and hopes into something shareable, how a valley gathers its past, its tongues, its weather, and offers it as a story to anyone who comes along. You meet no ghosts in that thought, only a sense of being kept company by all the voices of this place, and with that company you surrender to rest, the year turning outside and the river going on with its patient song. Before the candle gutters low, you listen to the inn gently settle around you. The timbers creak the way old trees do when wind leans against them. Someone laughs softly below, then a chair scrapes, then quiet, like a pond smoothing after a tossed pebble. You breathe in the faint perfume of apple and smoke and damp wool drying near the hearth. The rain no longer drums, it whispers, as if the weather itself prefers not to wake anyone. You turn in the quilts and feel the day loosen its hold. Travel leaves a hush in the bones that only stillness can answer. In that stillness, the hollow seems less a point on a map and more a meeting place, where road and river, memory and mile, sit down beside each other and nod. The country beyond your sutter moves in long, patient rhythms, river tides sliding past the pilings, geese stringing the sky with arrowed calls, fields already thinking of frost. Somewhere a cow shifts in her stall. A dog offers a single, satisfied huff, then curls to dream. Stories breathe in places like this, They lean over fences at dusk and ride home in wagons with the last of the corn. Some are bright as lanterns, meant to guide. Others are the soft-edged kind, meant to companion a traveller through the part of evening when shapes in the hedge look larger than they are. You do not need to hold the tail tightly to be kept by it. It rides at your side, the way a familiar star keeps your shoulder company on a night road. You picture the schoolroom that awaits you upriver, the quiet scratch of slate, the ripple of a recited psalm, a window framing a line of hills. You imagine shelves for your books, and children whose names carry the music of old countries, all folding into the country that grows here. Between faith and fear, between reason and wonder, there is room to sit, to listen, to learn. You will cross that bridge again in daylight, and it will be only a bridge, wood, water, light. And yet the world will keep its shimmer. Not a threat, but a kindness, the reminder that even the most ordinary lane can hold a little mystery at the edges. The candle gives one more steady glow and softens to a bead of gold. The room breathes with you. Rain slides into quiet. The river keeps its slow conversation with the shore. You let your eyes close and feel the road unspool from your shoulders, thread by thread, until it is just a line in the dark, leading on. Here, in the small hours, with the year turning toward its rest, you find your own. And in the warm hush, the stories settle too, gentle as leaves drifting down,